Shabbat Shalom. Gail Ramshaw, hold on. There we go. Gail Ramshaw is an internationally renowned Lutheran liturgist. She's written widely on feminist critique of religion and the wording of prayer, and she herself has actually written many prayers that are now part of the Lutheran lectionary, which, from my understanding, is the equivalent of the Siddur. Gail is somebody who advocates for change while also finding a lot of meaning in tradition. I had the opportunity to talk with her earlier this year. We discussed language and prayer and faith. We had what was for me a very meaningful and fulfilling conversation, and much of what she said has really stayed with me. When she told me about writing prayers and how she chooses which words to use for God, she told me how she appreciates metaphor. God is unspeakable and beyond words, she said. If we're required to use words, we need to admit that the words are approximating what we're trying to say. Metaphor is all we have, she concluded, speaking with absolute certainty. And then she told me a story about putting her children to bed one night a long time ago. In their nightly prayers, they had a tradition of listing everyone in their family. And at the end, when they mentioned God, Gail described God as a castle. After all, she reasoned, a fortress is often used as a metaphor for God in Psalms. But her son quickly shouted, "God is not a castle, God is God." I was reminded of this while reading this week's Parsha, the penultimate portion in the Torah, Ha'azinu. It's only one chapter long. The rabbis who set these things really knew how to draw things out to make a dramatic ending. And in spite of only being one chapter, which is fairly short, the number of metaphors used for God is plentiful. We could spend a lot of time looking at each one, but just to give you a taste, Moses presents God as male and female, as animate and inanimate, as relatably human and incomprehensibly other. God is dew and rain. God flares up in fire. God labors to birth the people and nurses them like a mother. God is a valiant warrior. God is a rock, steady and fixed. God bears a flashing blade. God is an eagle flying through the air. God is an eyelid. It's practically a bombardment of language in just a few sentences. These words often contradict each other. They possess mixed metaphors, and they appear in very quick succession. Now, this could be experienced as somewhat destabilizing. How are we supposed to bring all of these metaphors together? Perhaps Moses is trying to prove in his final moments of life that God is not any one thing, that God is beyond comprehension, that perhaps God is both father and mother, both dew and fire, both within us and completely outside of us. There is not any one singular way to understand God. Divinity can be found anywhere or in anything, after all. All of these different words and images and metaphors could help us to connect to God as a wondrous being, and at the same time, force us to accept that we have a very limited understanding of what God is. We can only understand something that is completely incomprehensible through the things that are comprehensible to us. The power of a caring parent's hug, the feeling of rain dripping on our heads and dew under our feet, the warmth of a fire, and also how that very same fire has the power to destroy, the weight of a rock in our hands, how its cool, smooth exterior eventually crumbles into sand over centuries, and then miraculously somehow becomes a rock again. In our texts and our liturgy, God is all of these things, and God is none of them. Metaphor, as Rabbi Andrea Weiss puts it, becomes a means by which we can span the chasm between the known, our world, and the unknown, the divine. Now, I have no doubt, as I mentioned, that we could spend time analyzing each of these metaphors for God. We could discuss perhaps when God has felt like one of these metaphors in our own lives, or which ones feel absolutely impossible to relate to as God. But for today, I want to focus on one of them, Hatzor, the rock. We see this used as a metaphor for God in our liturgy over and over again, and it appears 8 times alone in our portion this week. Just to give you a sense, that's quite a lot, 8 times. So what is the significance of thinking of God as a rock? What do God and a rock have in common? In this portion, we read that a rock is steadfast, true, and upright. These words highlight the seemingly immovable aspects of a rock. A rock can also protect us. We can understand from this that God is loyal, upright, always by our side. A large rock, as I mentioned, can provide protection, which is a characteristic that is often invoked in the Psalms. We often sing of God, as Cantor Fishbein did earlier tonight, as Suri V'go Ali. The words are up there. My rock and my redeemer. This could also be translated as my rock in whom I seek refuge. And then in our everyday lives, we often find rocks on the ground. They're not really so special, right? I had that thought in mind that rocks really aren't such a big deal as I watched a video posted on Facebook from Rabbi Robin Ashworth Steen. She's a rabbi in Manchester, England, and grew up at the synagogue where the brutal anti-Semitic attacks happened yesterday. Every week, without fail, Rabbi Ashworth Steen posts a short thought, really just a few minutes, about this week's Parsha. And as she put it, just because something terrible, something absolutely unthinkable happened yesterday, that didn't mean she wouldn't post about the portion today. Because after all, that's what we Jews do. We are resilient and we continue despite it all. So Rabbi Ashworth Steen said that thinking of God as a rock was giving her strength specifically today. Why? She said, I'm holding on to the strength and rock of divinity today. For me, it symbolizes nature and the groundedness of this universe. She continued, we will stay grounded to our values. That's my rock. She said she wanted to ground herself like a rock to connection and to holiness. She mentioned that she was planning on making food for loved ones, a simple act, and yet one that can also be profound if we want it to be, perhaps just like a rock. An everyday object, one found in nature, something that we don't really think about, something that we don't think of as important, was grounding to Rabbi Ashworth Steen today, while her community experienced an unfathomable, deadly anti-Semitic incident. And just a day before, on the eve of Yom Kippur, our holiest day of the year, much closer to home, there was another act of anti-Semitism. The FBI ended their long-standing relationship with the Anti-Defamation League. They had worked together for years to fight anti-Semitism and extremism. The FBI has not offered an official explanation, but I'll admit it's challenging for me to understand how the severing of this relationship makes Jews safer, especially because the director of the FBI characterized the ADL, a century-old Jewish civil rights organization, as, quote, functioning like a terrorist organization. In saying that, I would argue, he establishes a precedent that any civil society group monitoring extremism can be labeled a threat to national security. And specifically labeling a Jewish watchdog group as a threat, I hate to say it, but I think we've seen that before. But I'm not going to panic. I'm going to follow Rabbi Ashworth Steen's lead. I'm going to be reminded of my values, of our values. I will find my own sense of rootedness, of feeling grounded in Hatzor, in God as steadfast, upright, strong, and loyal. And I'd like to invite all of you to do the same. So I got you a small gift. Just outside, when we go to Oneg, services aren't over yet, but when you go to Oneg following services, there will be a table with rocks. And I'd like to offer one to each of you. Now, this could just be a rock, something to put on a shelf or a desk, and it can gather dust and you can forget about it. Or it could be something more. You could hold it in your hand, letting its cool, smooth exterior calm you. Let it remind you of how you can find holiness wherever you look, that the rock can provide protection and strength. The rock can remind you to be grounded in your values, just as Rabbi Ashworth Steen suggested. And on days when you don't feel strong, let the rock remind you of your strength. Let it be a comfort. In just a few short days, we will start the holiday of Sukkot. Building a sukkah is perhaps the most defiant act anyone can do. We put together a structure that we know will not last forever and in fact is not designed to. But as Rabbi Perelman reminded us yesterday, the sukkah is supposed to remind us of the possibility of joy. During Sukkot, our Zman Simchatenu, our season of joy, we connect with nature and with loved ones. We eat food outside, and we are once again reminded of the fragility of life. The sukkah reminds us that we continue to build in spite of impending storms. We continue to build because that's what we do. We show up because we believe in making the world better, and we continue to hope and pray for better days to come. We each have the ability to identify our own feelings of being rooted and steadfast, even in the face of a storm. And if you forget, let the rock remind you. Adonai tsuri v'goali, God is my rock, in whom I find refuge. Shabbat shalom.